If it's Monday, violence spreads in Gaza, catching another hospital in the crossfire as President Biden indicates that top U.S. and foreign officials could soon reach a deal to release more hostages being held by Hamas. All as a divided Congress looks to send Israel additional aid before the end of the year. Plus, inside Democrats' potentially dire political emergency. Our new NBC News poll shows the president facing abysmal numbers on his handling of the Israel-Hamas war as younger voters show signs of breaking with Biden heading into a presidential election year. And Trump's lawyers challenge the federal gag order, barring him from disparaging witnesses and harassing prosecutors in his D.C. election interference case, calling limits on the former president's speech unconstitutional. Hello and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles reporting in Washington on an incredibly busy day on the foreign wars front. At this hour, expectations are rising around Israeli hostage negotiation talks as a deal may be inching closer and as fighting near another hospital in Gaza intensifies. Meantime, President Biden faces dismal poll numbers at home, including over his response to the Israel-Hamas war, as Congress aims to pass aid for Israel and Ukraine, and the Secretary of Defense makes a surprise visit to Kyiv today. We begin, though, in Gaza, where overnight explosions and fire were seen near the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza, where the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says that 12 were killed. The Israeli military denying that it shelled the hospital, saying that troops responded to fire from militants inside. Video obtained by Reuters shows tanks near the hospital. NBC News has not been able to independently verify where the footage was shot. And Israel has repeatedly claimed that Hamas is using hospitals in Gaza as militant strongholds. Yesterday, the IDF released 2 new videos from the Al-Shifa hospital after gaining control of the medical complex last week. The first video apparently showing the entrance to a Hamas tunnel under the hospital. The second video, which is CCTV footage of what Israel says are hostages being taken inside Al-Shifa Hospital on October 7th. NBC has not independently verified the IDF's description of either of those videos. Now, the security video release comes as we're seeing positive messaging on hostage negotiations from Israel, the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar, which has been mediating with Hamas. President Biden was pressed on the progress of these negotiations earlier today.
Mr. President, is a hostage deal near? I believe so, but I'm not prepared to talk. You believe so? Yes.
Now, but even with this optimism and the urgency around a potential deal, the White House also urging caution. This was Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner speaking to Kristen on Meet the Press yesterday.
What I can say at this point is that some of the outstanding areas of disagreement in a very complicated, very sensitive negotiation have been narrowed, that I believe we are closer than we have been in quite some time, maybe closer than we have been since the beginning of this process to getting this deal done. But at this point, we really need to adhere to the mantra that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
Now, the negotiations also come as foreign policy is having an effect on domestic politics. Our latest NBC News poll shows dismal approval numbers for President Biden, as only 34% say that they approve of his handling of the Israel-Hamas war. Meanwhile, congressional leaders are looking to muster support to get an aid package for both Israel and Ukraine passed by the end of the year. The Republican-led House already passed a solo Israel aid bill, but Ukraine aid has been a priority for the Senate and the White House. And in a surprise visit to Kyiv today, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, pledged the U.S. continued support during a meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky.
The message that I bring you today, Mr. President, is that the United States of America is with you. We will remain with you through the long haul. What happens here in Ukraine, that not only matters to Ukraine, but it matters to the rest of the world. It certainly matters to the United States of America. And so the United States and our allies and partners will continue to work to get Ukraine the capabilities that it needs to be successful.
And joining me now is our team of reporters. Raf Sanchez is in Tel Aviv. Andrea Mitchell joins me on set, and Garrett Hake is on Capitol Hill. So, Raf, to you first. What is the latest on the ground at the Al-Shifa hospital, and have people been able to evacuate there?
So, Ryan, hospital officials are saying there are still several hundred people inside of that hospital, if you can call it a hospital anymore, without power, without functioning water. The World Health Organization says it's basically just an empty, surrounded building at this point. These are people, for the most part, who are literally too sick to leave, who are unable to go out. The good news, as it were, is that earlier today, 28 premature babies who were born at Al-Shifa Hospital, who were taken out of their incubators when the neonatal ward lost power, have crossed over from Gaza through the Rafah crossing into the relative safety of Egypt. Now, Egyptian officials are saying several of them are in pretty serious condition, as you can imagine, having spent the entirety of their short lives in this war zone. They are being flown from the border to Cairo, where they will receive intensive treatment in the Egyptian capital. There were 39 babies initially in that neonatal ward. Palestinian authorities are saying that 8 of them have died over the last week, but the whole world is really hoping and praying for those surviving that they pull through.
Yeah, these images are heartbreaking of these poor premature babies. Now, Raf, as the fighting continues in northern Gaza, Israel again urging people to go south. Are there brief pauses along the humanitarian corridors continuing, and are people actually heeding that call to evacuate?
So, Ryan, I was in Gaza last week with the Israeli military. We were on the edge of one of these so-called humanitarian corridors, watching just this huge stream of humanity going past, families, parents holding babies. They are heading south, and what the Israeli military told us is of the community that has stayed in the north, they are responding to warnings about individual neighborhoods. If they haven't responded to the general warning to leave the north, they are finding people are responding when they go around with bullhorns in specific neighborhoods saying, look, the fighting is coming to streets near you, you need to get out. Israel, of course, pointing to these humanitarian corridors as a sign of their commitment to getting civilians out of harm's way. But, Ryan, for Palestinians, this looks and it feels like forced displacement. This is the deepest Palestinian national trauma, being forced from their homes by war and not being sure when or if they'll ever be able to go home. Right.
And of course, there is another hospital that has been caught up in the fighting in Gaza. What's the situation there? And is Israel also claiming that Hamas is using this hospital for a shield for its operations?
Yeah, so this is the Indonesian hospital. It is all the way up in the northern end of Gaza. Footage from today appears to show that hospital surrounded by Israeli tanks. And the Palestinian Authority is saying at least 12 patients have been killed inside the hospital by Israeli fire. Unlike other hospitals, it is still functioning somewhat. We asked the Israeli military about that earlier. They said their troops came under fire from militants inside of the hospital, that they returned fire, but they denied allegations that they shelled it. Ryan.
Okay, Raf Sanchez live for us there. Thank you, Raf. We appreciate it. So, Andrea, let's turn to you now. And, of course, we saw John Viner on Meet the Press yesterday talking to Kristen about the status of these negotiations. President Biden did sound optimistic during his remarks today, although they were brief. What are the sticking points to getting a deal done here?
The sticking points, according to everyone involved, remain the same. Israel concerned about the length of the pause, that it not be a ceasefire, and the ability to verify what is happening with the hostages. Obviously, there are the exchanges of prisoners, so they have to go through names back and forth as well. But it's also getting the aid in. It is the hostages, but the U.S. is deeply concerned about getting the aid in, the fuel, the food, the water, the fact that people are being sent south now. And they had been told to go south, but now they're being told that they're going to be attacked in the south. Where are they going to go? There's no exit. So it's trying to open more, more exits, actually. And there's one in the north to Israel that some members of the Senate and, our Hill voices can weigh in on that. But in talking to senators today, that's also one of the big sticking points. I think they're very close to it, just judging from the mood music. And it isn't done until it's done, and then it could be done very, very quickly. Right. It could happen in the middle of the night, obviously, for our purposes.
And if it does happen, how does that change the trajectory of the war? It seems as though the hostages are such a focal point for both sides.
the hostages are a focal point for the U.S. and for Israel and some of the other international countries, because we know that there are some agricultural workers from Thailand, from elsewhere, who were workers there. But the world is seeing the civilian deaths, and that is causing a lot of concern in the White House, in the State Department. There have been dissents filed by Foreign Service officers and within the cabinet as well, that Israel is not seeming to listen to the U.S. about the concerns that were quietly expressed, then publicly expressed. You saw that just a week ago from Secretary Blinken and others, and now more openly being expressed criticism of Israel for not the mission, but the way it's being conducted, for the targeting, for the UN schools that were shelters, as well as obviously the hospitals.
Right, and the hospitals, of course, are a big part of this criticism of the way Israel has conducted this war. They continue to claim that the Al-Shifa hospital, perhaps this Indonesian hospital that was under attack today, are just fronts for part of the military operation there. They've released this CCTV video, which we showed earlier, that purportedly shows hostages being taken into the hospital. Does that help to bolster Israel's claim? Is there any way to verify that this video is what they say it is?
There's no way to verify it. And the fundamental criticism that you're hearing from the administration and the Hill and from around the world now, which, arguably is completely overwhelming the empathy that was originally felt around the world for the horrors of Hamas's attacks that started this war. But the fact is that the civilian casualties, the argument goes, are disproportionate to getting 1, 2, 3 terrorists from tunnels, especially since the bombing, the craters, the 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs in the refugee camps early on in the war, the first week or two of the war. That has really changed the dynamic, and it's growing pressure. And you know this better than I, because you cover it every day, the Israel money is in jeopardy on the Hill,
very much,
which it never would have been in the past. So it's a political problem, but it's a humanitarian problem. And you've got the UN, you've got Macron in France calling for a ceasefire. The pressure for a ceasefire is going to intensify, which will shorten Israel's ability to conduct the war the way it really wants to. And the argument from the U.S. is that it could be done more tactically to avoid more civilian casualties.
Yeah, well, thank you, Andrea. And you've perfectly set up Garrett Haake, who we're going to go to next to talk about the status of that funding on Capitol Hill. Garrett, I saw that Senator Jeff Merkley has just come out with a very strong statement in favor of a ceasefire. We're starting to see that becoming, certainly from the more progressive end of the Democratic spectrum. How does this all impact the passage of a supplemental bill and the urgency to get this done before Christmas?
Well, Andrea laid out the point that this has become more complicated. It's a good sort of way to think about just how dysfunctional Congress has become when something like aid to Israel that's supported by probably 95% of members in both parties and in both chambers who all want to get it done and get it done urgently has become such a heavy lift. But I think what you're going to see now is the month of December almost entirely devoted into exactly how to get that aid plus aid to Ukraine across the finish line. From the House perspective, the Speaker has fired the first shot by passing that Israel aid bill that is, of course, linked to cuts to IRS funding. That's not going to go anywhere in the Senate, and it essentially forces the Senate to come up with a counteroffer. They're never particularly good at moving quickly. This is no exception. And the discussion on the Senate side right now is how do we attach border security policy changes and money to an aid bill to make it palatable enough to even send as a counteroffer back to the House. The tension now, I think, over the next month is going to be how do we kind of put enough, sugar on this pill to make it go down in either chamber for something that everybody wants to see done. Is the Israel aid alone enough to get that across the finish line, or is it going to take a much more convoluted process? Brian, I imagine you probably make the same bet I do here, which is bet on convoluted.
Yeah, it's always more convoluted, even when it doesn't need to be. But to your point, Garrett, it does seem as though the Speaker is really the key negotiator in this process, right? He's got to be the one to go to these Senate negotiators and say, this is the kind of package I'm willing to put on the floor, right?
Yeah, and he's also the most unknown operator here in all of this, which makes it a little bit more challenging if he doesn't be the one to kind of outline what he wants. He doesn't have a track record speaking for anyone other than Mike Johnson when it comes to trying to decide what could work here. The The other problem is he simply may not know. Every other opportunity, the House conservative wing has proven how unruly they can be. They had to pull, I think, 3 funding bills off the floor at various stages over the last couple of weeks. What Johnson says might fly might not ultimately be what flies, which could lead you to on the other hand argument, Ryan, is it might be better for the Senate to just pass what they can pass and kind of go with a tale as old as time here. There's nothing more traditional in Washington around the holiday season than the Senate jamming the House on something. Now, with the spending bill out of the way, perhaps it's the supplemental on which the Senate leaves, coal at the footsteps of the House right before they leave town.
Yeah, and not to get too far into the weeds, but it's not just that easy for the Speaker to bring it to the floor because the Rules Committee is loaded with these conservatives, and so there's all these roadblocks along the way. So this is a much more complicated process, even if 90% of the Congress supports it. Garrett Haig, thank you so much for that report on Capitol Hill. And coming up, the kids aren't all right, at least not with President Biden's handling of the Israel-Hamas war. We'll dig into the top takeaways from our brand new NBC News poll, including that gaping generational divide and why it's painting a difficult political reality for Democrats heading into 2024. Plus, Secretary Austin's surprise wartime visit. We'll have details on the Biden administration's latest high-profile push to tighten ties between Washington and Kyiv, even as additional Ukraine aid hangs in congressional limbo. But first, we go to break. We're taking a moment to remember former First Lady Rosalynn Carter, who died Sunday in Plains, Georgia. Her husband of 77 years, President Jimmy Carter, has been under hospice care at their home since February. Mrs. Carter leaves behind a long legacy of humanitarian work, community service, and groundbreaking political activism.
I don't think I could ever compare myself with Eleanor Roosevelt, but there are so many things that I see that need to be done. I don't think I have ever shied away from controversy. I don't think Jimmy has ever shied away from controversy. Jimmy has always told me that if you do anything, you're going to be criticized. The only way not to be criticized is just to be mediocre, never do anything. But the things that I want to work with are the mental health program. I've worked with that for a long time. I'm very concerned about that. I want to work with programs of the elderly. Everybody talks about the elderly, but nothing gets done for them. To me, it's urgent.
She certainly wasn't mediocre. Rosalynn Carter was 96 years old. Welcome back. As we mentioned, there's some tough numbers for President Biden in our brand new NBC News poll, and a big driver of that is his performance with younger voters. Check this out. President Biden trails former President Trump in a hypothetical 2024 rematch by 2 points. It's the first time he's ever trailed Trump in our poll. And Biden also lags behind Trump with voters 18 to 34. Biden was up among those voters by 28 points in our final 2020 NBC News poll. In fact, it was one of his key constituencies in that 2020 victory. President Biden also gets low marks for his handling of the Israel-Hamas war, with just 34% of all voters approving of his conduct. And that number is even lower among voters 18 to 34, with a whopping 70% disapproving of his handling of the conflict. And joining me now to talk more about this is John Della Volpe. He's the director of polling at the Harvard Institute of Politics and an NBC News contributor who's closely following the voting habits of young Americans. So Donald Trump is leading President Biden among young voters. That is a major reversal from what we saw in 2020. What's your reaction to seeing these numbers less than a year out from Election Day? And should someone at the White House be hitting an alarm bell right now?
Well, listen, Ryan, I see a lot of polling that shows that the race is close. In some polls, Donald Trump is up by a couple of points among younger voters. In other polls, he's down by a couple of points among younger voters. Younger voters will not be supporting Donald Trump in a year from now. That I know. That I'm sure of. What also, though, we can't take this lightly. The White House cannot certainly take this lightly. It's a signal. It's a signal that younger people who were such an important contributor to President Biden's coalition in 2020 are questioning, what they have received in terms of deliverables over the last couple of years. And remember, polls are snapshots and not movies. And I think over the course of the next 11 and a half months, we'll see a campaign, which is a movie, where $1 billion will be spent reminding younger people of the many accomplishments from the Biden administration, comparing President Biden to the alternative. But I'm not convinced, based upon crossed-outs of a couple of hundred people, that the president is actually losing the youth vote to Donald Trump.
Is it really not so much a concern for the president about losing the youth vote as much as it is that these young voters just decide to stay home on Election Day?
Yeah, so there's a couple different aspects of this which are important, right? Number one is in 2018 and 2020 and for many races in 2022, we saw historic levels of youth participation, part one. The second part of that, President Biden received 60% of that vote in 2020, second only to Barack Obama in 2008. So the combination of high turnout as well as high support for Democrats are the key. You have to have both parts of that equation working. So it's both a question of making sure that young people turn out and that they choose, basically to participate in the two-party system here, choosing Democrat or Republican, and not one of the myriad of independent candidates right now.
Yeah, of which there are quite a few to pick from. Our poll also has young voters disapproving of the president's handling of the Israel-Hamas war by a pretty big margin. Do you think that this is contributing to the drag on his support with young voters?
Yeah, I think unlike the such a horse race, these numbers have been pretty consistent from poll over poll over poll, and yet roughly, a fifth to a quarter approve, which means a solid majority disapprove of that. And I think this is an era where foreign policy does matter. We know that, the president's honeymoon was interrupted by Afghanistan in 2021. And we know now also that younger people, have a fundamental different perspective regarding the Israel-Hamas war than their parents and their grandparents. And they prioritize, as we can see in these numbers and other polls, they prioritize protecting civilians. They are sickened by what happened October 7th, but they also are prioritizing the innocent Palestinians on the other side. And they're telling us through this polling that they empathize as much for the Israeli people as they do the Palestinian people.
All right. John, thank you for putting it into context for us. We appreciate it. Let's talk to our panel about it now. Joining me on set is Dan Merica, who's a national political reporter for The Messenger, Juanita Tolliver, who's a Democratic strategist and an NBC News political analyst, and, of course, the great Republican strategist, Matt Gorman. Juanita, you're great, too.
I'm like, come on. I need accolades, right? Wow.
Matt hasn't been on the table for a while.
Okay.
Juanita, welcoming me back. As soon as I said that, I was like,
instant regret. I got you after.
We're good. All right. So, Dan, there's a job approval rating for the president, according to this poll, at 40%. His handling of the economy, foreign policy, these marks are all among his lowest. Is this the bottom, or could things get worse for the president in terms of his reelection hopes?
I mean, I think there is some belief inside the Democratic orbit that this is the bottom, given what was said about the Israel-Hamas war, how that is dragging down younger voters. I think there's a difference in how people look at this. Democrats look at this inside Biden world and outside Biden world. I think there's an acknowledgement outside Biden world that these are serious issues. It could impact Democrats who are running for offices, not only for Senate and House, but down ballot races as well. If this is a drag on Democrats broadly, there's a sense inside Biden world that this is a snapshot in time. This will change. There's a belief that foreign policy will not be the thing that decides this election, that it will be issues more close to home, abortion, guns, the economy, et cetera. And there are, Biden world thinks that they can win on those. On this Thanksgiving week, I think there are two things that Biden's thankful for. It's Trump. He's glad he's running against Trump, and time, that we're about 11 months 100%. Out.
100%.
Yeah, we're 11 months out. So those are the things that he is thankful for.
That's a risk, though, for them just to assume that foreign policy is not going to dominate 100%. This election, given the situation in the world. And Juanita, it wasn't too long ago that Joe Biden was picked to join Barack Obama's ticket because of his foreign policy credentials. Are you surprised that this has become a drag for him?
Not on this specific issue, because we've seen that generational divide with young people, millennials and Gen Z, really breaking apart from older individuals and voters in this country. So I'm not surprised by that number. What I was surprised by, and happy that John beat it back, was Trump will not walk away with a margin on the youth voters in 2024. Now, what I am concerned about, though, for the Biden administration is the lack of of energy, the lack of joy and excitement around voting, because we have seen youth voters in 2022, in 2020, flex this big muscle that shows their political power. But I fear some of them will stay home because they're looking at this like, my life hasn't really improved. I'm still struggling. And on top of that, I have to pay student loans back.
Yeah, and I talked to a Biden campaign aide about this over the weekend, and they acknowledge that this is a problem, and they also acknowledge that they're working on it. Is that important? They can't just assume that these young voters are going to come around, right?
Take nothing for granted. That is my message to the Biden campaign, and they have to get out there and fight for every single vote. I know that the campaign made a conscious decision to not have Biden on the trail in 2023. They might be second-guessing that. What I do hope they're second-guessing is this focus on digital over in-person organizing on the ground, because you need to meet these young people where they are. The president needs to speak to them and learn from them and set a positive vision that they can get behind.
So, Matt, is this an opening for Republicans? I mean, especially when it comes to foreign policy, because is the Republican position when it comes to conflicts like the one in Israel in line with the rest of the electorate?
Well, I think for most of the electorate, it's kind of united when it's very pro-Israel. What I would look at is how the Democratic Party is becoming far less pro-Israel, especially younger voters. When you look at some of the most pro-Palestinian voices in the party, they've been elected from 2018 on. I mean, also look at what was trending last week on TikTok, which is the most go-to news source for folks under 35. Set aside the spyware Chinese issues, it was Osama bin Laden's letter to America.
Yikes.
And so, I mean, like, you have to consider what is being told on these massive platforms.
And on your question about whether the White House is, I mean, they have beat back some of those things. The Osama bin Laden, you saw the White House put a statement out on that. I mean, they're clearly aware of this and worried about it. You know, whether they're going to outwardly say we're worried about a poll right now, 11 months out, is another question.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about this poll, and I want to walk you through something that's interesting. It says that Trump narrowly leads Biden head-to-head, but both Biden and Trump are losing to a generic opponent, which means any of us at the table could potentially win a race for president if we were up against Joe Biden or Donald Trump. I'm shocked to see how weak both of these potential nominees are, Dan.
It is why a lot of pundits and people who study this think that the people who are going to decide this election are so-called double haters. People who hate both candidates and have concerns about both candidates. It's the reason that both candidates kind of need each other at this moment, that there's Biden who needs the unpopularity of Trump and vice versa. Trump needs Biden to be in this position. So he's not where he was in 2020. He's not seen as the alternative to what was an unpopular Trump administration. These double haters, the people who have concerns about both candidates, are likely going to be the people who decide this election, and those are the folks who are up for grabs.
I mean, Juanita, isn't that a concern, though, for Democrats when you're talking about joy and wanting to go cast a ballot?
100%.
If you're looking at two options that you don't really like, do you just say, I don't even feel like going out?
Sadly, this is what I'm already hearing from some youth voters, that they don't see a viable option here. And I think they're also saying that with consideration for some of the third-party candidates who are on the ticket. Look, I think Joe Manchin is probably looking at these numbers like, oh, here's my opening. No, it's not. I promise another old white dude is not the answer here.
Right. So, Matt, you just worked for a Republican presidential campaign. For viewers who don't know, I'm sure they do, because they follow your career very closely. You worked for Senator Tim Scott, who just stepped down. You look at these numbers. Senator Scott said multiple times on the campaign trail that Trump can't win a general election. Do you still think he's right?
Certainly at this point in time, the polls show that that's not the case anymore. And it's not just this one poll. Yet the Times come out. Multiple polls have shown this. And look, I think this also hurts an argument. Now, Tim Scott can't make this anymore. But how many times on the trail have other people pitched themselves, I'm the Republican who can win? It's a lot harder to make that argument now than it was a month ago. A lot harder. And so I think when you look at this, you know, maybe this changes in 6 months. Maybe it gets worse. Maybe it gets better. But right now, it's a lot harder to say that than it was a month ago.
But let me challenge you on that, Matt. So you make the argument it's 50-50. But what if it's Nikki Haley? Would the numbers be different? I mean, she might be able to make the argument, I've got a better chance.
I mean, you could say it was a generic Republican. I mean, she would be up in a large margin. And also, if she's in the ballot, or even DeSantis, you're talking about bigger gains in the Senate, keeping the House. It is a different scenario if anyone else in the ballot as opposed to Trump.
All right. So, Juanita, the president joked about his 81st birthday, which is, of course, today. I want to play a clip of how he joked about it.
I just want you to know it's difficult turning 60. Difficult.
course, he's 81, so he turned 60 a long time ago. Is this the way to handle this? To kind of joke and lean into the fact that you're old, but understanding that that's a concern voters have?
If he repeats it, right, the more people hear it, the more people can see the juxtaposition of him showing a degree of strength on the campaign trail compared to Trump, who we see week after week rambling at different microphones across the country, then it will help. But again, it's not the only move. Where's that positive vision, Mr. 81-year-old president? Like, how are you going to excite people again post-2024?
I want to show you one other thing from our poll, and it's the net favorable entities that we polled beyond just Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Look at this. Taylor Swift had a
naturally
plus 24%. Israel does pretty well in this. Beyonce does pretty well in this.
Of course.
Ukraine does. Everyone else has a negative favorability rating. And I should also point out that even Taylor Swift is not does not have a favorable rating of over 50%, which, take that for what it's worth. I mean, it seems as though people are just unhappy with everything. If you're running in an environment like this, Dan, how do you turn people's opinion around?
I think the lesson I take from that is that Taylor Swift and Beyonce should be the presidential ticket next year. I'm not going to weigh in on who should be president, vice president. I'm going to get into that. But it's hard. I mean, when there's a lot of negativity out there, that does not suit an incumbent. People want to be happy. People want to be confident in their lives. And when there's that level of negativity, it's a difficult environment for an incumbent to run in, and it's a different environment for Democrats to run in general, because they're not the party of change like they were in 2020. In 2020, they were going to be the change from Donald Trump. This is a totally different election for them, and that is something that the Biden campaign is going to have to answer for the next 11 months.
So maybe she can't get on the ballot, but Taylor Swift, a potential late entry write-in campaign. I've got a blank space.
At least campaign surrogate. I like the pun. I caught that.
There you go. Okay, sorry. I'm very sorry. Dan, Juanita, Matt, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Up next, a new legal challenge in the Trump trials. We'll get an update on what exactly went down in court today as Trump's lawyers push to get a federal gag order in the special counsel's election interference case thrown out. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. It appears a gag order against Donald Trump in his federal election interference case may survive an appeal. Earlier today, a federal appeals court grilled lawyers for the former president who argued that a gag order violated his constitutional rights. The judges did not issue a decision yet, but questioned Trump's attorney about the claim that the former president's speech can't be curtailed at all. They did, however, signal that the gag order could be narrowed. NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian joins me now. So, Ken, explain, what was the Trump team's basis for this appeal?
So they argued that this was an unconstitutional order, that it violated the First Amendment. This is prior restraint on speech, and there's a high bar for that in our country, particularly for somebody who's running for president. And they said that the prosecution didn't make the case that the things that Trump was saying had led to violence, that there was any impact at all, really, and that they argued that he should be free to criticize his political opponents, to criticize the prosecution. But it did not appear that this three-judge panel, all appointed by Democratic presidents, didn't appear that they bought those arguments, although they did also closely question the government lawyer about these free speech issues.
Yeah, so explain that more. Did they seem receptive at all? Did the judge seem receptive at all to these arguments?
Well, they acknowledge that there is a First Amendment issue here, and it's no accident that the ACLU has weighed in on Donald Trump's side here, because there is a concern about chilling political speech. But what the judges seem to suggest is that a trial judge has to be able to prevent a criminal defendant from, say, threatening witnesses or trying to tamper with jurors. And they were posing hypotheticals to Trump's lawyers to try to get him to, sort of set the parameters of his First Amendment argument. He wasn't biting. He refused to give any ground because he knows that this is most likely going to end up in the Supreme Court.
And Jack Smith, the special counsel, was in the courtroom, and that's not normally, he's not going to enter a courtroom for a hearing like this. How significant is that?
Well, he's been at a lot of the big courtroom showdowns. He was there to show support for his people, and this is an important one because Jack Smith personally is being threatened by people after being called insane and a lunatic and corrupt by former President Donald Trump.
And if If this gag order is kept in place, how could they narrow it? How could it change from where it currently stands?
So, like, for example, it uses the word targeting. It prevents Donald Trump from targeting certain categories of people. There was some discussion about what does that even mean, and could we be more precise in the language? So they're trying to give Trump room to criticize people without violating, witness tampering or jury tampering.
All right, Ken Delaney, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. And as Trump's lawyers continue to wage their fights in court, Trump himself is continuing on the campaign trail, visiting the southern border yesterday to hammer home the issue that helped get him elected in the first place, immigration. NBC News campaign embed Jake Traylor has more.
Former President Donald Trump back at the border this Sunday, his first visit in more than 2 years. By his side, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who endorsed the GOP frontrunner, praising Trump's border policies. Trump quickly attacking the Biden administration.
We're going to take over that border and we're going to make it. We had the most secure border in our history. Now we have the most unsecure border in the history.
Echoing frustration his supporters across the country have been voicing for months.
We need to secure that border. It's getting ridiculous.
I think President Trump is strong and we need help in our border, and that's why I voted him in the first place.
The latest NBC News poll shows similar sentiments nationally. Overwhelmingly, participants favor southern border security funding over military aid to Israel, Ukraine, or even humanitarian aid to Gaza. When he ran for president in 2016, Trump made border security a top issue.
Build that wall. Build that wall. Who's going to pay for the wall? 100%.
And made big promises.
We have 1,000 miles that we need.
In reality, it was U.S. taxpayers who bared the brunt of the cost, not Mexico. Ultimately, under a Trump administration, only 453 miles of border wall were addressed, most of which were reinforcements. Only 47 miles of new barrier were added under Trump. But still, residents here say they felt more secure back then.
As soon as this administration took over, you accidentally drive to the border here in Edinburgh and McAllen, and as soon as you get there, there's flooded people, too much crowding, it's an unsafe situation.
Angie Garcia lives in the border town of Edinburgh, Texas. She's grateful for Trump's attention.
People really need to take a look down here in the valley and see what the local border residents here are going through.
We have been inundated with the chaos that is going on right now on the border.
Border Patrol agent Myra Banks shares that concern. She's been on the job 18 years and says this is the worst she's ever seen it.
Part of the border is wide open. It's wide open to have hard narcotics come through when we're not able to be out in our areas patrolling as we should be.
And under a Trump administration, that felt different?
It did, indeed. It felt very different.
For Trump, it's familiar turf. Talking tough on immigration, building a narrative, with or without building the wall. Jake Traylor, NBC News, Edinburgh, Texas.
All right, Jake, thanks. After the break, we're taking a deep dive into how money is changing the game for student athletes and why Washington might have to get involved in the new world of college sports. That story is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Thanksgiving week usually marks the unofficial end to the college football regular season. And while many top players usually announce their intentions to leave college early to go pro, but several potential pros are actually staying in school thanks to new rules that could allow them to make even more money in college than in the NFL. In the latest episode of Meet the Press Reports, Chuck Todd looks at this new world for college athletes. He spoke with Reggie Bush, a star college running back at USC, who had to leave early just to make a living.
There's this narrative of you're supposed to be broke, you're supposed to be struggling, you're supposed to be in the dungeon till wee hours of the night, grinding, working on,
you should be thankful
essays,
for that scholarship.
Midterms, you should be thankful for the scholarships. And also, it's a fair trade. Your education is a fair trade for, the scholarship. So,
is it though?
We now know that's not true.
Right.
After Bush joined the New Orleans Saints, the NCAA launched an investigation that found that a sports marketing company, hoping to sign Bush as a client once he turned pro, had provided him with benefits and paid for a 3,000 square foot home in San Diego for his parents to live in. Among those other benefits was a suit and a limousine ride to the ceremony, where Bush accepted his Heisman Trophy. The NCAA harshly punished USC, banning them from bowl games for 2 years, revoking scholarships, and retroactively forfeiting a year's worth of wins. Faced with the likelihood that he would be stripped of the Heisman Trophy, Reggie Bush voluntarily returned it.
We didn't know any better. We just knew that we're here, we're playing college football, this is an opportunity of a lifetime, we're living out our dreams, but this is not the final stop for us. This is just a springboard to get us to the next level, to be able to make money and to be able to take care of our families and to play at the highest level.
And joining me now to talk more about this is Chuck Todd. So, Chuck, let's talk about the rise of these name, image, and likeness deals. Right. And do they essentially render the NCAA useless at this point?
They do. And in fact, it was a court of law that rendered the NCAA useless, right? There was this rule that governed whether an NCAA athlete could essentially make a living outside of sports. And this got challenged in court, and the court struck down the NCAA law. So what happened is you had essentially a tapestry of state laws came up, and each state has a slightly different way that they have legalized the ability of a student athlete to make money off of their name, image, and likeness. And the reason why are we covering this story, Ryan? Well, it's because the only way to bring some sanity back to this system and maybe some fairness is there has to be a federal law that governs sort of the interaction between these, and frankly, a federal law that protects students from these collectives if the collectives back out on a deal. It's sort of in the same way you need the FTC to, make sure the contract you've signed with NBC is followed through upon. This is a similar situation here.
And do you think there's any scenario where the NCAA just hands the authority over for particularly college football and college basketball to these collectives? Is that something that could happen down the road?
Well, I think what you're going to see is, and I also on this episode of Meet the Press Reports, I have Senators Cory Booker and Richard Blumenthal and it's Jerry Moran. These are the three senators that are essentially writing the law in conjunction really with some input from a lot of the conferences and student athletes. And they want to create sort of a public-private corporation. There's a corporation that oversees Amtrak, for instance, and it's a congressional chartered corporation. It would be a similar situation, a sort of a private entity that Congress would create that would be the governing body to these NIL collectives. Now, the question, of course, becomes, okay, can you limit, do you put some, almost like a salary cap, if you will, right? And I don't know if you'll be able to pull that off, but one thing Congress can mandate is that all NIL collectives have to abide by Title IX rules, which of course means 50-50 in money you spend on men's athletics and women's athletics. And I think if you do that, then you'll see a situation where a lot of athletic votes rise in both genders.
You know, what's interesting is that the current NCAA president is a guy by the name of Charlie Barker, who, of course, we knew was the governor of Massachusetts at one point. How does his political background make him uniquely situated to address this issue right now?
So I hope, once again, tune into the whole full episode. I also have a good sit-down with Charlie Baker. And I asked him that. I said, what's the big difference between being a governor, he talked about he had a state legislature, had, say, 100, 200 odd mayors that he had to deal with. But ready for this statistic in the NCAA? There's 168 committees within the structure of the NCAA, which he oversees. The point is, it's more Byzantine than what you cover, Ryan.
Wow.
That is more committees than Congress, and we think Congress is dysfunctional. Look, this is a mess. I think, you're going to see a couple of large scenarios. He would like to just take the top 60 schools, put them in one category so that he can govern the other 950 schools, right, that are out there. Congress, and he's begging Congress for their help to do this. So I actually think this is one of the things in a bipartisan way Congress will do, because ultimately I think everybody has a interest in Congress to see their local college team have a fair shot at winning.
Yeah, and we talk about football and basketball, but some of these other sports are just exploding in popularity. Tens of thousands of people going to a volleyball game in Nebraska. This definitely is something that needs to be regulated and reined in before it gets too out of control. Chuck, an excellent topic. We look forward to the full report. It's always good to see you. Thank you for joining us. And you can catch more of Chuck's reporting and stream the entire episode of Meet the Press Reports, Student Athletes, College Sports, and NIL right now via Peacock or YouTube. And still to come, I'll talk to a member of the Ukrainian Parliament about the future of the war against Russia and Washington's relations with Kyiv as Ukraine braces for another brutal winter on the battlefield. You're watching Meet the Press Reports now. Welcome back. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin made a previously unannounced visit to Ukraine today, meeting with the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and senior Ukrainian officials. He publicly reaffirmed the United States' support for Ukraine. Secretary Austin's visit also serves as a high-profile push for aid to Ukraine back at home, as efforts to send money and weapons remain stalled in Congress. However, congressional leaders tell NBC News that lawmakers are aiming to pass an aid package for both Ukraine and Israel by Christmas. I'm joined now by Kira Rudik. She is a member of the parliament in Ukraine. So Secretary Austin, of course, is in your country today for that unannounced visit. What can you tell us about the meetings he was in with senior leadership today? And what is the Ukrainian government telling him about the state of the war?
Hello, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for keeping focus on Ukraine. We really need it and we appreciate it. Well, the Austin's visit to Ukraine is important on three levels. The first one is, of course, military level, because we really need the support that was announced. It's $100 million of support, including ammunition, different kinds of weapons for the preparation for the winter. Second level is a political one, because we need this sign of support and that Ukraine is still a priority, being sent to all the other politicians and leaders in the whole world. But it is also an important morale boost for Ukraine, because the closer we get to the end of the year, we are with Russians' attack on our infrastructure, on how we would survive the second winter since the full-scale invasion. And of course, this support that is stalled in the U.S. Congress right now is a matter of concern. So this is really important, because Ukraine also can show our preparations for the winter and share the plans that our military have for going on with the military activities during the winter.
And you mentioned that you are concerned about congressional support for additional aid. And, our reporting says that it's going to be really crucial to get this package wrapped up before Christmas. Would it be very concerning for you and your fellow members of Parliament if Congress is unable to push through a deal before the Christmas holiday?
Absolutely. We are extremely worried since the moment of Speaker being re-elected in the Congress, because for us, every single day is a matter of lives. Every single day, our military are not receiving enough of the ammunition and additional military support. It means we are losing lives. So it's not just 1 week here, 1 week there. It's the way how we are calculating our days is how many more lives we will lose if we will not get the support in time. This is why, of course, get it till the
Okay, we are having some technical difficulties in our conversation with Kira Rudik, who's, of course, in Ukraine right now. So we're going to instead turn to the White House, where the holiday season did kick off today with not one but two time-honored traditions. President Biden pardoned two lucky turkeys this morning, Liberty and Belle, of course, named for Philadelphia's iconic landmark. The birds, who were the National Turkey Federation chairman says enjoy Honeycrisp apples, and Taylor Swift, of course, shared a room at the Willard Hotel before their visit to the White House. This was Biden's third turkey pardon and the 76th anniversary of the event. But before Thanksgiving festivities are fully underway, the White House is already looking ahead to the next holiday. First Lady Jill Biden received the official White House Christmas tree this afternoon, standing at nearly 19 feet tall. The tree is going to be the centerpiece of the Blue Room's annual holiday decor. And it was quite an event out at the White House. Of course, the White House Christmas tree lighting is expected for later, probably in the beginning of December is when they're going to plan for that. And of course, the turkey pardon, an annual tradition that happens every year at the White House. I've been to one before. It is an interesting event. You can see those turkeys there. They end up going to a farm, I believe in Northern Virginia, where they live out their days, just getting fatter and fatter. But never will they be under the gun to end up on someone's plate for dinner. So we're happy for those turkeys. And that does it for us this hour. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, maybe even more turkey coverage if you're lucky. NBC News Now coverage, though, continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.